Kelly, Sister Linda works at Sam's. Do you know that? She used to be a pretty good cinnamon roll maker. It's a whole deal now. It did. It hurt. I had to pray about it. That's a story for another time. I've been barred from Walmart by my wife. I'm getting that close from being barred from Sam's by my wife. And when she figures out how much I have recently have come to just love Harbor Freight, y'all pray for me, okay? You leave her alone.
Let her know Harbor Freight is such a good place.
That's right.
Tell her I just tolerate it. If I have to have something like that, I can.
But guys, here's what I have learned to get out of the doghouse, especially with Harbor Freight. Honey, I had to have that for grandbaby stuff.
There you go.
I can't fix her stuff without the right tools. I can't blow her pool up and her favorite little balls. I can't blow them up without an air compressor. And I can relate to you because my car has been in the shop for the past 30 days or more. I gave them a list of about 5 things to do. They did everything except what I thought was going to be the easiest job, and that's just replace the radio. Because my car, the radio, you have to go through the radio to program everything. That's just the way it is. You just have to. And so he thought I just wanted a new radio. He's just going to put in an aftermarket radio. I said, no, that's not going to work because I have to program everything through that. It's not going to accept my key. I got to program it. So they went through 2 radios before they found out that the guy who was shipping the radio was dyslexic. They kept shipping the wrong GM part, and the guys are like, we've asked for the same part 2 days in a row, or two weeks in a row, and they keep sending us the same thing back. And they started looking and went, I think he's dyslexic. So they called him. So now they've sent the 3rd radio, and it's locking them out. It's saying this vehicle's stolen.
Oh, no.
So now it's,
The Cadillac?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So now it's at the dealership because Cadillac, starting in about 2006, there was a rash of radio thefts out of Cadillacs a few years before. So they said, well, we'll fix that problem. We'll just make it to where if you pull a radio out, you have to take it to a dealer to have it put back in. And so pretty soon, all of the Cadillac radio thefts went, and all the money that dealers were getting paid to replace radios went sky high. It's always something, isn't it?
Yep.
I heard somebody say in a sermon that the people who love the pastor show up on Sunday mornings. The people who love the church show up on Sunday nights. And the people who love God show up on Wednesday nights.
Amen.
Sounds about right. All right. I'm going to try and just turn this front row of lights off and get started. Everybody see okay? Everybody hear okay? Most of y'all have probably seen a lot of this information before. This is about the 4th time I've given this. I used to call it a prophetic update. And this time I wanted to just kind of expand upon it a little bit because what I am doing, I'm in the middle of putting together a Bible study for the book of Revelation. And you can't just go in there and just do one in a week. It's a big deal. And so what pastor's going to do, he's going to finish the preaching or the teaching that he's doing now. Then he's going to move on to another topic. I think it's the Christian's Toolbox. Anybody remembers that teaching that he did some time back? That'll be the next one he does. And by the time he's done with that next one, I'll be ready to start a chapter by chapter Bible study of Revelation. And it's going to be interesting. I have learned so much in the short time that I've been getting ready and doing the study myself and trying to figure out what direction I want to go. But what I want to do tonight is do basically a prophetic update, because how many of y'all pay attention to what's going on? I mean, how many really pay attention to what's going on and how it relates to the Bible? A lot of people don't, because it scares them. If you get scared, you probably need to get on your knees. Because what we're seeing taking place is confirmation, or should be confirmation to us, that we're about to be raptured out of here. We're fixing to not have to put up with this mess anymore. We're fixing to not have to go through all of the really bad stuff that's coming. We think it's bad now. It doesn't even hold a candle to what's coming to this world. So, and a lot of people just don't want to, for whatever reason, they don't want to pay attention to it. They don't believe it. They don't want to accept it. It's too confusing. So what I'm trying to do is just break it down as simple as I can. If I can understand it, I feel like I can get other people to understand it as well, because I'm by no means a theologian or a scholar or anything like that. So Jesus, I believe, was on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him, and actually they had a discussion, and in the middle of this discussion, Jesus prophesied. He starts prophesying, and he starts telling them things. We're going to go with one of the big prophecies that he gives them. And then when they think about it, they think and they go, well, that's pretty devastating in and of itself. What are the signs of his coming and the end of the world? They thought they were asking one question. They're asking two questions. And that's what we're going to talk about. How many remember me telling you about the fullness of time? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Does anybody not know what I'm talking about when I say the fullness of time? Things happen when things are prophesied. How many times when a prophecy is spoken does it happen right then? Or that day? Or the next day? Or that week? You can't see that for me. That's all right. I'll tell you what you need to know about it. And if you want a copy of this, tell me and I can email it to you. Just make sure I got your email address. Let me give you an example of what fullness of time is. The time period from the fall to the flood. Okay? From the time of Adam and, I got a little, there we go. From Adam to Noah. If you look in chapters 5 and 6 of Genesis, we're talking 1,558 years between Adam and Noah. Okay? The number of man's days, the Bible says we were given 120 years. It took 100 years to build the ark. Once the ark was built, it rained for 7 days, and then the door was shut in 1 day. So do you see where the fullness of time to get us from the fall of Adam and Eve to the flood started over 1,000 years earlier? Okay? It took 1,500 plus years to get from Adam to Noah. But once Noah came on the scene, man's days were numbered to 120, and then it took 100 years to build the ark. After the ark was built, it only took 7 days of rain, and then after the rains came, it took 1 day to get the ark shut. It took 1 day to get everybody loaded up and shut that door and get out of there. So what I'm asking is, do you see how time is accelerating? Okay? when you get a prophecy, it's out here. You don't know when it's coming, but it's coming. And the closer you get to that prophecy being fulfilled, there are signs that show you that those things are being taken care of until the day that it's taken care of. The Exodus is another good example. According to genealogies, there was 360 years between Abraham and Moses. Okay? Moses watched flocks for 40 years. Then the 10 plagues in Egypt lasted several weeks. And then finally, when the king said, get out of here and take your people with you, they were out of there within 24 hours. It starts out here, and the closer you get to the completion or to the fruition of the prophecy, things start accelerating to get that thing accomplished. There's Old Testament prophecies of Christ. The first one was about 4,000 years before Christ was born. And that's in Genesis 2. I believe it's Genesis 2, where the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. 1,700 years before Christ, there was the prophecy of the scepters would not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. 1,000 years before Christ was born were prophecies of his crucifixion, in great detail, I might add. 740 years before he was born, it was prophesied that he would come from Bethlehem. 700 years before he was born, it was prophesied of his suffering to bring on our healing, Isaiah 43. Then the prophecy 450 years before Christ was born was that he was going to be the Son of Righteousness. So the plan started way back in the garden, 4,000 years prior. It took 4,000 years to get there, right? But you can see as things were happening, as other prophecies were coming about to bring this thing about, the time span kept getting shorter and shorter. Now we have the arrival. Malachi 4 and 2, from that point until John the Baptist, the closing of the Old Testament, the beginning of the New Testament, 400 years. No prophecies for 400 years. Now, from Adam to Jesus, we're talking 4,000 years. Now, from Jesus' birth to the start of his ministry was 30 years. It took 4,000 plus years to get from the point where God said that the seed of the woman would stomp the head of the serpent. Okay? Once Jesus was born, we had to wait 30 years for his ministry to start. Then we had his ministry for 3.5 years. Then he was preparing for his passion in Jerusalem for 7 days. And then when it was all said and done, he spent 3 days doing what only he could do and setting the captives free. So you see how that went from 4,000 years, the fullness of time came about, and in between it just accelerated. So does everybody, I'm probably doing a horrible job of explaining this the best way possible, but I'm trying to show you that when a prophecy goes out there, as things are set into motion to bring the prophecy about, time accelerates. Everything accelerates. It was 4,000, and then all of a sudden it goes to 400. All of a sudden it goes to 30 years. All of a sudden it's 3.5 years. All of a sudden it's 7 days, and then all of a sudden it's 3 days. And then it's done. Here's another good example from 70 AD to 1948. 70 AD is when the Temple at Jerusalem, as Christ prophesied, we'll talk about in a second, was destroyed. Okay? For 1,878 years, there was no Israel. Then all of a sudden in 1948, there's Israel. It took 19 years for Jerusalem to be reunited as the capital. It took 18 years for the Ethiopian Jews to begin to return to Israel. And then it took 4 years for the Russian Jews to return to Israel. So we had 1,878 years of no Israel, then bam, all of a sudden, 1,878 years later, Israel is reinstated, and then within a relatively short amount of time, things start happening again as it was prophesied. The fullness of time is what it's talking about. When in the fullness of time, such and such and such, means that's when the fullness of time is the appointed time when something is supposed to happen. Now, starting with Matthew 24, 1 and 2. Jesus and the disciples are having this conversation on the Mount of Olives. Jesus went out, he departed from the temple. Wasn't the Mount of Olives. They had just been in the temple. This conversation, from what I've studied, says that this particular conversation happened in the temple as they were walking out. His disciples came and asked him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon the other that shall not be thrown down. Jesus has given the prophecy that in 70, within 40 years or less at this point, that temple was going to be razed to the ground. Now, let me explain to you why the disciples were so distraught at what Jesus had said. And this will put it into perspective. Josephus says that some stones were 94 feet long. Now, he's just talking every stone is going to be brought down. Nothing standing. 94 feet long, 10.5 feet high, and 13 feet wide. Those stones are humongous. There were 162 columns that held up the porches, which were 52 feet high. Every stone was removed and a plow run over the place it stood, fulfilling Micah 3 and 12, which said, Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest. So when Jesus told them, you see all of these stones that make this beautiful temple that we're at? I'm telling you that the day's coming, that place isn't even going to stand here anymore. And they looked at Jesus and probably thought, are you crazy? Look how big this thing is. Look how huge it is. Look how huge one stone is. How is that even possible? But that's what happened. Some 40 years after Jesus said this, there was a widespread Jewish revolution against the Romans in Palestine, and they enjoyed many successes. But ultimately, Roman soldiers crushed the rebels, and in AD 70, Jerusalem was leveled, including the temple, just as Jesus said would happen. This prophecy was fulfilled literally. There was a real temple, and it was really destroyed, and the literal fulfillment of this prophecy establishes the tone for the rest of the prophecies in this chapter that we're going to go over. And we should expect a literal fulfillment of these as well. So now, after they've heard this, is where Jesus gets the question by the disciples, what are going to be the signs of your coming, and when will the end be?
What was the years on that you started with? On the last one?
About the temple being destroyed, 70 AD, 70 years after Christ was born. So about 40 years after Jesus had spoken in Matthew 24. And this, Justin, I'm going to need you to just click on that video. This just shows you how massive this temple was. And you can go ahead and unmute the sound on it too, because there'll be videos with some talking and stuff on it. tall that building was, if we took this roof of this church off and extended it up 8 times or 5 times as high as it is right now, that would be about what the ceiling height was in the temple.
And another knowledge, I was just thinking, they could go out and buy the material, they can make that, they had to make all this stuff.
Yep.
And they have sheets.
The first 8 signs that Jesus gives them that they need to be looking for his return are called the beginning of sorrows. We're going to go over these 14. There's more than 14. These 14 are what I want to kind of concentrate on. This is going to get us through to the rapture, basically, because Jesus talks about a lot of things that's coming during the tribulation. Okay? And you've got things that's going to happen the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, and you've got things that are really, 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 really bad the last 3.5 years. Okay? He tells us about deceptions, false Christs, wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilences, earthquakes, anti-Semitism, offenses, betrayals, hatred, false prophets, lawlessness abounding, love decreasing, and I've got in bold, increased missionary work out of volume 14, and I'll tell you why that's bolded and italicized when we get to it. Deceptions. From the outset, Jesus warned the disciples that many would be deceived as they anticipated his return. And there have been times in history of the church when rash predictions were made and then relied upon, resulting in great disappointment, disillusionment, and falling away. Every 10, 20 years, there's somebody who comes out with a book saying this is when the world is going to come to an end. This is when the rapture is going to take place. Oddly enough, I haven't heard any rash predictions in the last several years, so I don't know what that means, but I can remember as a teenager in the Pentecostal church, there was some kind of book out where they were talking about the rapture was going to take place in the 80s. Brother Donnie was scared. Because the Bible calls 666 the number of the beast, many Christians in 17th century Europe feared the end of the world in the year 1666. The Great London Fire, which lasted from September 2nd to September 5th of that year, destroyed much of the city, including 87 parish churches and about 13,000 houses. Many saw it as a fulfillment of the end of the world prophecy. And given such a large amount of property damage, though, the death toll of the fire was remarkably low, reporting only 10 people, not quite the end of the world. Beginning when she was 42 years old, Joanna Southcott reported hearing voices that predicted future events, including the crop failures and famines of 1799 and 1800. She began publishing her own books and eventually developed a following of as many as 100,000 believers. And in 1813, she announced that in the following year she would give birth to the second Messiah, whose arrival would signal the last days of the earth, despite being 64 years old, and as she told her doctors, a virgin. She died before a baby could be born. There's just a bunch of folks. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, and I have noticed part of my duties working at a sheriff's office, just by nature of it being the sheriff's office, when mental commitments are done, it's the sheriff's office responsibility to go get those people and take them to the appropriate medical facility. Okay? A city officer has no idea what we do. I cannot tell you the number of people where I have looked at the paperwork to see what kind of a person we're dealing with and what kind of a mental issue we're dealing with through the years. How many people, part of the reason why they're being mentally committed is because of their religious beliefs. Right, Casey?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's not necessarily that because they're Christians, it's because the devil has corrupted their mind and deceived them. They believe they're Jesus. They believe they're pregnant with Jesus' baby. They believe that they are to usher in the end of the world. I mean, it's far-fetched stuff. And until I got back into church, it just never made sense to me why so many people were being committed into mental institutions, and a big part of that reason was because they were going around speaking all this crazy stuff. Well, that's the devil working their mind over. And they've let the devil work their mind over. And the devil's taking control of their mind. So, and that is a way for the devil to discredit the real Christians and the real Christian beliefs. Okay? That's just another crazy person talking about Jesus over there. I could go on with more folks of this nature. There was, I guess the last one I've got noted here was December 21st of 2012. It marked the end of the first, quote, great cycle of the Maya long count calendar. Everybody remember 2012 when the calendar was a piece of paper was going to throw the world into turmoil because somebody wasn't smart enough to say, oh, let's start over with 2013. January 1st goes here. I never understood that. False Christ. There's always been people who falsely present themselves as being the Messiah. It's happened ever since Jesus died. It may have happened before Jesus was born. I don't know, but it certainly has happened several times. And what I've done is some research on notable people who have claimed to be Christ. Now, going as far back as the 18th century, there were really only two who purported to be Christ. One of them was a Shaker. Anybody, I'm taxing your history memory. Anybody remember what the Shakers were? They were a religious sect that kind of broke off, I believe, from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the second one in the 18th century was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the 19th century, there were 7 notables. One of them was William Davies, a leader of the Latter-day Saints. And Krishna Venta. He was born under a different name in San Francisco. He founded the Wisdom, Knowledge, Faith, and Love Fountain of the Word cult in Simi Valley in California in the late 40s. We go into the 20s, or the 20th century. Anybody heard of Jim Jones? Okay. What about Charles Manson? David Koresh. Marshall Applewhite. Anybody know his name? Why do we know his name, Rick?
He had some kind of mothership or whatever that was going to come, and his devout followers met together and were draped, I believe, purple. And were given the Kool-Aid so that they could be at rest, so that a ship would come and take them away. What they were actually looking at, I believe, was a comet.
This was in about 1997. Let me give you a little story. Now, I got to give you this story to set up what I'm going to end with. Okay?
Is it like a show?
I have no idea what that is.
Well, they all do the same thing Jimmy Jones did in California. Now have certain sneakers on.
They may have all had Nike shoes. I started patrol with the sheriff's office in 96, and I worked midnights, okay? I worked with 2 old guys. They were old then, they're really old now. Great guys, Sergeant Vincent, Corporal Cox, and they would train me. And I would ride with one of those 2. They've been doing it for years. Both of them at midnight turned on AM 1290, and we listened to a radio program called Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. Anybody ever heard of that? 3 of us. Was that not the coolest show ever to be listening to at 2 o'clock in the morning? Out in the middle of nowhere where it's dark and things go bump in the night? Art Bell, he enjoyed the crazier the caller was, he ate it up. And he had a bunch of them. We're talking long haul truckers at 2 o'clock in the morning traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast. And they would just call in. Open Lines Friday, my favorite night of the week. Open Lines Friday, because you never knew what Art was going to talk about. But he always had, it was about the unknown, the unexplainable, conspiracies, things of that nature. And to me at that point, it was just, number one, it was just entertainment, because there was nothing going on out in the county at that time of night. And he started talking about Hale-Bopp Comet. And it was just interesting because it was Hale-Bopp Comet, it was coming close to the Earth, and really as Art Bell was describing this and talking to astronomers and things, they were just talking about how Hale-Bopp works, you know, and why we get to see it, and its relationship to Halley's Comet, things of that nature. Just legitimate nerdy stuff, okay? Well, I remember one night as I'm getting ready to go to work, news breaks that this cult in California committed mass suicide. Applewhite's people. Heaven's Gate. And they show pictures from inside where everybody was. They all had white Nike shoes. They all had white pants. They all had a white shroud that covered them up. And that was the day that Hale-Bopp was coming its closest to Earth's orbit. And he had convinced these people, as Rick had said, that behind the comet was the mothership that was coming to pick them up and take them out of here before the tribulation occurred. And you need to drink this Kool-Aid and lay down, go to sleep, and when you wake up, we're all going to regroup up there in that ship. I suspect there's some upset people. All right, I got to keep going because I've got stuff that's going to blow your mind. Okay, I'm just telling you. How many don't want your mind blown tonight? How many just can't handle having your mind blown? Okay. Wars and rumors of wars. My goodness, wars have been going on since the beginning of time. Matter of fact, I got an interesting stat here. Of the past 3,400 years, humans have been entirely at peace for 268 of them. Or 8% of recorded history. This just breaks down. Thank God for the internet. Wikipedia is great. You can get all kinds of great facts and stuff there. It breaks down how many wars occurred during these time frames. From 1300 to 1200 BC, there was one, two, all the way until 700 AD. Then we go to 4, then we back down to 2, then we're back up to 4. Between 1500 and 1600, there were 5. Between 1600 and 1700, there were 11. Between 1700 and 1800, there were 21. We took a big jump from 11 to 21. What else happened in that time frame? This is not where I'm trying to blow your mind. 1776? Okay. From 1800 to 1900, there were 36 wars. Anything big happened between 1800 and 1900? 1900 to 2000, 37 wars. We could almost name all of those. And then so far, 3 wars, and those 3 wars are continuations from wars from these 37 right here. So why am I showing you this? I'm just showing you how Jesus talked about wars and rumors of wars. Look how it went from ones, twos, fours, boom, all of a sudden. Okay, and today, if you look at the headlines, Russia is moving stuff to Ukraine. Ukraine is trying to take Crimea. Iran is threatening Israel again. Syria has been bombing Israel. Israel's been bombing Syria back. I mean, there's just, and then you talk about the cartels in Mexico. We can't leave them out. Here's a big one. He says, for nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now, you got to know that the Greek word for nation is the Greek word ethnos. That's where we get the word in English ethnicity. Race against race. Are we seeing that today? Have we seen an uptick in that? Kingdom, from the Greek word basilia, is the territory subject to the rule of a king. Okay, so we're talking about literal kingdoms there, or entities. Look over in the Middle East. You know, you've got Syria, you got Turkey. Turkey now is upset with the United States because we declared what they did hundreds of years ago to be war crimes. And now they want to take it out on us because we recognize that. So there's just all kinds of silliness going on, just like there always has been. Famines. There's always been famine somewhere, right? What you can't tell is this is a worldwide hunger map. There's actually a website that you can go to and get real-time information about most of this stuff that I'm telling you. There's a website that you can go to where you can see what global conflicts are going on, who's involved, what it's about, and kind of where they're at in that whole thing. It's pretty neat. You can keep up with the world famine. 2.5% or less of the population is going to be about this color right here. So most of your larger countries, your civilized countries, your not necessarily civilized, your industrial countries, okay, not your third world countries, are running at about a 2.5% prevalence of famine. I suspect now, if I'm not mistaken, this was last updated in 2019. I suspect that everybody's been bumped up because of COVID. Speaking of COVID, Jesus said we would encounter pestilences. COVID is a pestilence. As of the 26th of April, there were 146 million, almost 147 million confirmed cases of COVID worldwide. Okay? Including 3.1 million deaths, a total of 933 million vaccine doses have been administered. They now say that there are 4 substrains and 11 top mutations in the United States of COVID. So COVID's growing, it's changing. You know, it's like the flu. Don't you have to have a flu shot every year? 2 of 4 substrains in the United States have become potentially more infectious. The word there is infectious, not deadly. The mortality rates aren't any higher from what I can tell off of these. It's just that you have a higher chance of being infected if you're around somebody with one of these 2 substrains. We could spend the rest of the night talking about how COVID well, let me say this. A lot of things are going to take place after we're out here. Okay? The Antichrist, when he takes control, there's got to be a lot of things in place in order for him to manipulate those things, to make prophecy come to life during the tribulation. Okay? One of those things is what they call a reset. Okay? Have you heard about the global reset that people are wanting to push for? They're going to use COVID-19 as the precipice for a global reset. Lumber. How many's bought lumber in the last month or two? Good gravy.
Triple.
We were repairing the floor over here in the wall in the Sunday school room that got flooded. I used to go buy a wafer board, 7/16 wafer board, for like $7.99 a sheet. That's the cheapest sheathing that there is. We paid $35 a sheet. We were going to put 3/4 inch tongue and groove plywood down. That stuff was 50 some odd dollars a sheet. 2x4s were almost $10 and $12 a piece. Yep. Well, there's a lot of reasons why, and one of the big reasons is, let me simplify this because there's a long explanation. Demand is high, supply is low. Supply has been low on purpose because the lumber industry doesn't want to invest in expanding their operations, because if they catch back up, the lumber prices go down. Okay, so that's part of it. The other part is COVID related, because the lumber companies made money during COVID. Remember when they came on and said, well, you can't go here, and you can't go here, and you can't go here. But you know what? If you have to go buy shrubs and flowers and make repairs to your home, those businesses can stay open. So everybody who had money, who was working from home, or they were staying at home, it don't take long to be staying at home with nothing to do, and you're looking for things to do. They started doing home improvements. So now all of a sudden, everybody's repairing their homes, building stuff. Now the supply is running loose. And so there's a whole big old thing with that. And on top of that, there is a built-in factor of lumber mills each year that catch on fire and have to be shut down for extended amounts of time until they're repaired and put back online. That's just the cost of doing business in lumber, because lumber mills will catch on fire spontaneously. It just happens. They said that last year in 2020, an unprecedented number of lumber mills caught on fire at the same time. So there's just this there's a whole lot of things making the perfect storm.
There was a lot of hurricanes last year, too.
On top of that, on top of fires out in the west, that was unprecedented the year before. And another big thing is Canada ships most of our lumber to us, and we mill it here. They cut it there, we mill it here. They cut the borders off, and they're not sending anything to us. And I heard an expert just a couple of days ago when I was preparing this say, we're one catastrophic event away from the lumber industry bottoming out. Now, when we go through some of these other slides, just imagine if we have a major earthquake, major floods, major tornadoes, major snowstorms, or all of these at the same time. Imagine what that'll do to other industries. How many of you like orange soda? Gonna be hard to get here before too long, you watch. What I'm hearing now is that the major soft drink producers, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, there's an aluminum shortage. There's an aluminum can shortage. And so now they're saying we're going to have to cut back our production, and we're not going to be able to make as many different flavors. We're going to have to go from 15 flavors to our 2 big money-making flavors. And you probably saw that already starting whenever, probably about October, November, when production started ramping back up, businesses started back up. We saw a whole lot of Coke, Dr. Pepper, and 7-Up, and Pepsi, and that was about it. This slide just tells you that currently, right now, in the world, besides COVID-19, there's 20 other pestilences or epidemics throughout the world. And it ranges everywhere from cholera, Ebola, meningitis, monkeypox. And I don't even want to know how you get monkeypox. Plague, SARS, smallpox, yellow fever, and the Zika virus. I mean, these are things that's been hanging around for the last, 10 years? Zika virus and SARS. So again, we've got viruses, we've got epidemics all the time, and now, when was the last time we had a global pandemic? Spanish flu? Early 1800s?
And we went into the Great Depression, that wasn't until 1945, the country became great again.
Now we got earthquakes. I showed this slide several times before. I'm just counting magnitude 6.9 and above, okay? I count 6.9 because the Geological Survey doesn't want to call it a 7 because it'll freak people out. So they call it a 6.9. It's not a 7, okay? It's a 6.9. I counted all the 6.9s. This time frame there were 12. This time frame there was 53. This time frame there was 71. From 39 to 76, there were 71. From 77 to 2014, 229.
Wow.
So in a 37-year period, there were 6.2, 6.9 magnitude earthquakes every year. Okay? So between 2015 and 2020, there were 85. So let's do the math. 5 years, 17 quakes per year. With that math, at that rate, we could see 510 earthquakes in that 30-year period. And so far in 2021, we're only in the end of April, there's been 7 magnitude 6.9s. We're on track for 24.2 6.9 earthquakes this year. They're going up, they're going up, they're going up. I'm not going to mess with tornadoes. Hurricanes. Last year was a bad hurricane season on top of a global pandemic. For only the second time in history, they ran out of names to call the hurricanes and had to go to the Greek alphabet. Okay? Anybody know when this was taken? Just guess.
That was our blizzard, wasn't it?
That's 2 months ago. You see all of this? Snow.
Giant ice ball.
Now from about right here, right there, is rain. And inside that area was floods and tornadoes. And right here was all ice and snow. And they said that the damage that was done to crops, houses, deaths of people through this storm was equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane landing. So we've got pandemic, and then we've got all of these hurricanes, and then we follow it up with one of the biggest ice storms to hit the country in several years.
And you can see the country into that.
I'm not going to show you this video because I ain't got time, but it talks about, how many's heard of the Cascadia subduction zone? Cascadia subduction zone. You've heard of the San Andreas Fault? Everybody knows about San Andreas Fault. That's the one that, when that ruptures, that's going to knock California off into the ocean, right? There's one bigger than that nobody's talking about. That's this one. And it's just up the road from the San Andreas Fault. This zone is attached to San Andreas. This zone is just off the west coast of Washington State. Scientists have been studying this one for the last several years, and they have notated this is what happens. You have plates in the earth that perfectly fit like this, but over time they move and they shift, and they'll buckle under another one, and they'll start, as they move, they'll start buckling and get all this pressure built up, and then what happens is at some point one of those plates has had enough and it pops. And when it pops, all of that energy comes up. That's what causes an earthquake. And if it's in the ocean, that's what causes a tsunami. Fukushima in Japan, 10 years ago this month, I think, had a 9.0 earthquake just off the coast, which caused the tsunami, which devastated Fukushima. Okay? That place is uninhabitable because it flooded their nuclear reactor. And that's a whole separate story. Cascadia hasn't had a rupture in 324 years. It's about 100 years overdue. They've been able to go through scientifically through sediments in the ocean in that zone, and they can carbon date when they've had earthquakes. And it's like clockwork. Every couple of 100 years, give or take 10 or 20. They're over 100 years overdue on the next one. And the scientific analysis that comes in daily shows that these plates are still going, and it's just a matter of time. Why don't you hear about Cascadia being on the brink of blowing? Because if you lived in Washington, it scared the hell out of you, right? Can you imagine if somebody said Wichita Falls is going to have an earthquake in the next 90 days, and it's going to be a magnitude 9? We would all panic. Okay? So that's why I don't want to talk about this one. What they said is going to happen is if it's a 9 or above, the West Coast will fall off. Seattle, Washington, they're not built for it. Those homes are not built for 9.0. It's going to be catastrophic. You know, people are talking about Yellowstone, they're talking about San Andreas. This is the one they need to be worried about. There's been prophecies out the past 5 years or so of a tsunami hitting the West Coast. And it's believed that these prophets who've got a pretty good track record are thinking it's this one right here. Anti-Semitism, that's just Jew hate, people who hate the Jewish people. It's always been there. It's really kicked up again here in the last several years. Here's everybody's favorite congresswoman, Tlaib and Omar. And why they're not in jail somewhere is beyond me. But anti-Semitism is really on the uptick worldwide. Offenses. Boy, I could preach about 4 days on this. You notice my background? Snowflakes. This is not the time to be easily offended. Jesus said offenses are going to come. What's important is, how do you handle it? If you're going to be offended and you're going to dwell on that offense, you're probably going to be here to give a first account testimony of how the tribulation went. Betrayals. Jesus even, let me get my notes here. He said that even don't be surprised when your parents betray you. Well, why would they betray their children? Any ideas? It's going to go along 21-16, and ye shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and some of you shall they carry to be put to death. Jesus said that that's going to happen before he comes back. It's going to get to the point to where your own family, your friends, your neighbors are going to betray you because of your stance with Christ. And that goes right along with hatred. How much hatred's in the world today? I mean, my goodness. One thing that you shouldn't be right now is a cop, a Trump supporter, somebody who believes that COVID is overblown. You can't be them three things because the haters start coming out. Those are the three I can think of off the top of my head because I'd be all three of them. But there's plenty of reasons for people. You know, there used to be a time when politicians, what was his name? During the Reagan era, Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House, Democrat. Ronald Reagan was the President, Republican. Tip O'Neill, boy, he was somebody that was hard-nosed in Congress, well-respected, had his opinions. We need to do this. We got to. But at the end of the day, it was a known fact that him and Reagan, they would get together almost every day and have coffee or have lunch or eat together something, and they were very cordial with each other. But when they got into the room to talk about policy, it was on. That don't happen no more. I mean, we can't have Pelosi, Trump, and Schumer in the same room with the cameras rolling. False prophets. 7 characteristics of false prophets. They're man pleasers. They throw dirt at Christ's people. They're driven by their own heads and hearts. They pass over the law and the gospel for other things. Itchy ears. They use clever language and appearances to disguise themselves. They strive to win people in their opinion by winning debates, and they gain from their followers. You've got to beware, and Jesus said, especially nowadays, you've got to beware of false prophets. Now, everybody remember the Trump prophecies? Not going there. That's a whole nother thing. Smoke machines and skinny jeans. Who said that? Heard it somewhere. Huh?
Big screens, smoke machines, and skin.
That's about what the church is today. Lawlessness abounding. We've always had lawlessness, but man, it's really kicked up. And how did this happen? I've told you before. I think it all started when Madeleine O'Hare started her crusade to get the 10 Commandments out of public buildings, prayer out of school. The abortion laws were passed. That's when America's morale, that's when America's morals plummeted. And it opened us up to the snowflakes we got today, where everybody's entitled. Increased missionary work. I'm right there at the blow your mind part. Okay, give me just a minute. Jesus said, let me find it here. Brother John, you can probably quote it. Chapter 24, where Jesus said that basically the missionaries' work, the end won't come until the gospel's been preached to all the nations around the world.
Yes.
You're familiar with it. I can't find it. It's student heart. But Perry Stone just a few days ago put out this little snippet of video, and I'll just let you see what he has to say about it.
I want to greet everyone. Welcome to our YouTube channel. For just the next few moments, I want to give you what I believe is the most significant prophecy being fulfilled right now. The most significant prophecy being fulfilled right now. And of course, when I speak of prophecy, I'm talking about the scriptures that are alluded to both in the Old and New Testament that relate to the time of the end, the last days, the latter days, or what we would refer to as prophecies related to the return of the Messiah. Someone had asked me recently, what is left to be fulfilled? Well, if we look at the prophecies about the Antichrist and the tribulation and the 8th empire and the 7th empire, which we did a teaching on our DVDs on the Antichrist, there are many predictions yet to be fulfilled. Revelation chapter 4 all the way through chapter 22 has not yet happened. So there's much to be fulfilled. But what we're concerned about is what we would call the pre-tribulation scriptures that are significant to us right now. Now behind me, before I tell you the prophecy, are a set of screens, as you can see. And this is our Global Prayer Center, where every Thursday night from 6 to 7 o'clock we have live world prayer. And people send their prayer requests in. And it's a beautiful set. You can see it. We just did a meeting, what we call through the lens of the camera, to another country where 10,000 people watched me preach from this set right here. This just happened. Now think about what I just said. I sat behind that desk and 10,000 people in another nation where I had to use an interpreter heard me preach a message just as though I were there live. Someone said, how did you do it? They had a big screen set up. And so I was able to stay here and yet preach there to fulfill the greatest prophecy. It's Matthew 24:14. Now stay with me for a moment and listen to it. For this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. The fact that we are able, and other ministries are also able, to carry the gospel around the world to all the nations is the greatest fulfillment of prophecy right now that there is, in my opinion, in the entirety of Scripture. Now, just years ago, when I first started the ministry, let's say when I was age 18, 1977, there was no internet. There was no satellites as we know them now. And so what is amazing is we can actually go live on a telephone and reach the entire world while people log in. I can sit here and do global prayer. I can sit here and they can put up a screen in a village in another nation and thousands of people hear me, which means I don't have to get in the plane, go through security, maybe going into an area that would risk your life. You can actually do it from one location. Because the Holy Spirit spoke to me several years ago that revival would come through the lens of a camera. That is actually what's happening. So the greatest prophecy being fulfilled now is the gospel going around the world. But it also said this, don't miss this, the gospel of the kingdom. And I want to conclude by saying this too, that most of the time in our past, many people, ministries included and ministers, have been so denominationally minded, they have missed the kingdom. The message is the message of the kingdom. And the message of the kingdom is much more broad than just a message about a church or a denomination. That's the message that's going to be preached around the world. It's called the message of the kingdom. I will be happy several months from now on the Manifest telecast, a man that has the greatest revelation on the kingdom I've ever heard in my life. And we're going to take the gospel of the kingdom around the world.
You know, technology is just absolutely astonishing nowadays. And, you know, when we really saw the effects of technology when COVID hit, I mean, how many people talk to their loved ones via your phone or your iPad or whatever, your camera on your computer? People, I mean, there are businesses now who are changing the way they do business to let people stay home because they can work from home and they can have conferences from home and everywhere else. And the church is now getting into this deal where everybody's on YouTube, everybody's on Facebook, everybody's on Zoom. And Perry's one of the first ones that I've noticed that's taken it a step further, and he's taken this technology and invested in it, and he's actually going into foreign nations, a lot of nations that he wouldn't legally be allowed to preach the gospel in. People are in homes, they have this technology, and the gospel of Christ, the gospel of the kingdom, is reaching people who ordinarily would not have heard it. So, ready for your mind to be blown?
Yes.
Okay. I was afraid this was going to happen. Luke 21:11, Jesus said, "And fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven." Okay? Still talking. That was part of Luke's observation of this conversation that Jesus has been having with the disciples. Okay? We went through Matthew, and this is part of Luke's observation. We talked about technology. Daniel, you understand that Daniel, the book of Daniel, is a companion to the book of Revelation. Okay? There's a lot of places where they're like this. And then when you put them together, you go, oh, okay, now I got it. Daniel 12:4 says, this is God talking to Daniel, "But thou, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." You know, I've heard preached for years and years that this whole idea of going to and fro was about transportation. Y'all heard it too, hadn't you? Somehow that's a prophecy about airplanes and space shuttles and things like that. It really has more to the idea of searching after knowledge rather than rapid forms of transportation. How many of you, as of late, have had more of an interest to what the Bible is really saying and what the book of Revelation is really saying? And I want to know what this rapture is really about. And I want to know what this tribulation is really about. You know, there was a study that was done last year about people. It's become such a phenomenon, especially in the United States. People, I guess the data analytics are showing these people who monitor internet usage that the amount of people looking up subjects like rapture, end times, prophecy, and things of that nature has just blown up. And so people have this, a lot of time on their hands because of COVID, and they're hearing a lot of us saying, hey, this is a sign of the end times. And so they're trying to figure out, just like we are, what exactly are those signs. I've never been to college. Okay? I've not been to theology school. I've sat under some pretty good preachers, and I think I'm sitting under one of the best preachers I've ever sat under in my life. I'm a big Perry Stone fan because I learned so much from him. I believe he is truly anointed. I think that he's put on this earth at this time for this purpose, to share what the truth is. He's not the only one. There's several others out there. And just like I would expect you to do when I get done here tonight, I would expect you to take a little of what I say, some of what Billy says, some of what Perry Stone says, maybe what Jimmy Swaggart says, some of what Jensen Franklin says, this one, this one, this one. Look in your Bible and see if it fits, and ask the Holy Spirit to let you know if it's true or not. Okay? I'm telling you, I have changed my viewpoint on a bunch of things lately. And I am scared to go into this because I'm afraid y'all are going to try to put me in the mental institution. No, I do too. I am presenting this information because as I was studying, this came up, and I'm going to show you where it came up, and I went, what did he just say? And I had to pull over off the highway and rewind it and listen to it again. And I went, explained it about 3 or 4 times. Now, he said it. And then I started looking into it. Might be onto something. I'm just saying, listen to what I'm going to show you and tell you. You can chuck it out the door. You can go home and do your own research, which I hope you'll do. You can go home and pray about it, which I hope you'll join me in doing, and see if maybe there's not something to this. There's things that's going to happen in the tribulation that we are not going to be here for. Okay? And like I said earlier, a lot of things infrastructure has to be in place, because when this happens, it kicks off everything else immediately. So all of that stuff has to be ready. Okay? Technology is the number one thing right now. You know, the mark of the beast in the hand or in the head. You can't buy or sell without it. That technology, that infrastructure is here. And, well, how in the world would somebody know if I'm on the other side of the globe whether I'm a Christian or not? Well, because you got this little thing attached to you that you can't break loose of. This knows everything about you. And if you're a bad guy and Brother Donnie gets to investigate you, that's a bad thing, because I know how to manipulate this thing to find out stuff. Legally, of course. Because I don't work for the government. And that's a whole other story. So what I'm about to share with you, I am not telling you, number one, it's not a sign of the rapture. I'm just saying that when we study about the Antichrist and what has to happen when he comes, have you ever wondered how the one world religion happens? We can't get every Pentecostal to agree on the same thing. We can't get every Baptist to agree on the same thing. And the Presbyterians sure aren't going to agree with us on everything, and we're not going to agree with them on everything. Yet our Bible tells us that there will be an individual who is able to unite everybody. Everybody. That one world religion. How in the world could that happen?
There was a promo commercial for it like 4 or 5 years ago, or something like that. They've already been joining together and doing.
But it hasn't happened yet. There's too much disparity right now. Arabs, Buddhists, Confucius, atheists, Christians that miss the rapture. All of them are going to join this one world religion. And it's a good question. How in the world does that happen? Here's a go ahead.
That's the devil. The devil, if he can get Christians to do wrong, you know he can get sinners to do wrong. All he gets is
Absolutely right. So what's the tool that's going to be used to accomplish that? Because when the church is gone, the devil's got free reign. He's being withheld to an extent right now. Okay, he's being kept in check. When we're out of here, he's got full reign to use everything he's got available to do what he's going to do. An even bigger question is, how does the world explain millions of people who were here just then? They're no longer here right now. That quick, how does the world explain millions of people just gone? You're laughing. Listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I do not believe that Oswald acted in cahoots with a foreign government to assassinate the president. I think he shot the president. I don't think he was the one who delivered the headshot. It doesn't matter what I think. I'm just telling you, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. You would have never have heard me say that UFOs are a real thing. And you sure never would have heard me say, up until this past week, that I believe that what people consider aliens, extraterrestrials, would have a place in the end times. How many believe giants existed? And you know how they existed. Fallen angels. Okay, angels came to earth. They procreated with humans to form that species. That's why the flood had to come to wipe them out. Okay. So I'm listening, and I'm going to give you this excerpt from Hal Lindsey. Everybody know who Hal Lindsey is? One of the greatest teachers on Revelation, end times, and all of that stuff. Just fantastic. The late great planet Earth for all of you old timers. Rick shaking his head. Hal Linden, not Hal Lindsey. So I'm going to show you about a 10-minute clip of the Hal Lindsey that I was listening to that caused me to think this whole thing all over again. And I'm going to tell you that there's a video that those of you that want to stay behind and watch it, it's about 20 minutes worth out of an hour's presentation. Have you heard of Dr. Tom Horn? He's been Skywatch TV. Okay, he's a doctor, he's a theologian, he's an evangelical. He has published several books, helped in movies. He has been featured on History Channel as an expert in some things that on some shows that they've done. He's on It's Supernatural and a whole lot. And that's what that 20-minute video is about. Just to let you know, that 20-minute. Here's Dr. Horn's idea. Have you heard of the prophecy of the last pope? Supposedly, this is the last pope before the end times. And so he heard about this prophecy, and he said, that's interesting. I want to investigate that and see if there's anything to it. And so he investigated that prophecy. This video, if you're interested, I can tell you where to find it on YouTube. It's free, and it's very interesting. He goes through the history of the Catholic Church. Anybody heard of Jesuit Catholics? They're different. Catholics are different. Jesuit Catholics are really different. But he goes in and he's able to prove up that, yeah, there's this prophecy about the last Catholic. And there's even some astonishing facts that the Catholic, the cardinals who picked the popes, kind of kept those prophecies in mind as they're selecting these popes. Okay? And, well, we'll see how many sticks around after what happens, it says. Okay, go from there.
Then too dry here. All right, now, verse 35. And some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the time of the end.
His reference is Daniel
because
chapter
it is still
11,
to
starting in
come
verse
at
35.
the appointed time. All right, now here's this long line of history, the first 34 verses. And it sums up the treatment of past history there. When he wrote it, it was still future. But most of this has been fulfilled all of it was fulfilled up to verse 35. And in verse 35 it says, but at the time of the end, there are certain things that are appointed. And then there is another one of those big, giant, historical parentheses. And it leaps from the time back there to the end time. Now, look at verse 36. Then, in other words, after this leap of time, then the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and speak monstrous things against the God of gods
talking about the Antichrist.
And he will prosper until the indignation is finished. For that which is decreed will be done. It's interesting, some of the translations in the other passages here. Here they put it this way: then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, that is the true God, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. This is the New King James Version I'm reading from. Nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses. All right, now what is this telling us? You know, I've often thought, how is the Antichrist going to establish a one-world religion? As we'll see in chapter 17 and 18, he does. How in the world is he going to get Muslims and Buddhists and, you know, all of the Episcopalians and Presbyterians what I'm trying to say is all of those who are in church but really didn't believe, whatever denomination it is, because it doesn't matter what denomination you are. It's whether you personally believe that Jesus Christ died in your place and you've received the gift of pardon as a gift and asked him to come into your life, take it over. Now, there are a lot of people in church that just haven't had that personal commitment and experience. Well, that would be part of all of this. But the point is, I've often wondered how, you know, look at the Muslims with their traditions and everything. Man, they don't compromise anything. Confucianism and, you know, that religion of Mary Glover Patterson of Christian Science. All those people that got these religious history and traditions and things like that. How is he going to get everybody to do this? Well, he is going to come in, and it says he's not going to regard any gods. Not the God of gods, the true God, nor any God. False gods. But instead, it says, he is going to honor a God of fortresses. Now, what this word in Hebrew really is talking about is forces. And it's usually used with military forces. He's going to use a God who has great force. He's going to worship a God and introduce the worship of a God who has great force and especially able to put down military power, any kind. In verse 38, but in their place he shall honor a God of forces, a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. And he will act against the strongest fortresses. And that word means, in a sense, the strongest military powers. By means of a foreign God. And this word means alien. We're really being set up for all of this. The conditions have been being set up. Started in the 1960s. I was on the college campuses the whole decade, the 1960s, working with college students. And I was in Campus Crusade for Christ. I was working at UCLA, and I was the head of the West Coast, so I was at Berkeley a lot and so forth. I still remember between 1960 and 1964, a great swinging of a pendulum. Because, you know, before that, you talk to the average college student, he was an empiricist. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't hear, touch, taste, smell, whatever. And, you know, the thing that was in vogue on the college campus was to be a skeptic and not really believe in much anything that's supernatural, can't be proven by science. But as you draw upon 1964, all of a sudden, all over the country, in the classrooms and among the hippies, there were those that were turning to the occult and believing in supernatural things. Even the most doubtful professors were beginning to turn that way. And that kept swinging until now. Hollywood makes films about supernatural type of phenomena all the time, don't they? Phenomenal today. Things you see now, for the last 10 years, would have been laughed at 4 decades ago. But not now. You see, the mindset of the world at large, I'm talking about the secular world, has really been changed. And it's no accident. The word Satan means slanderer, and the devil means deceiver. Well, he's great at deceiving. And he's been setting the world up to accept supernatural things. There's also something else that's been going on. Now, don't pick me with George Noory or some of those others that kind of get spooky on UFOs and so forth. But there are sightings of unidentified flying objects that have been validated by men who are professionals, who had no motive to try to fool anybody. They were many pilots and so forth who have seen unidentified flying objects making movements that are beyond anything we know about on this earth. And I believe they're real. But I believe they come from a different source than what most people do. And I believe that's part of a setup too. You see, do you remember when Jesus was enduring his temptations? Remember the 3 temptations that Jesus was put to when he just started his ministry? In one of those, it says Satan took him up on a high mountaintop, and in a moment of time, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. You realize what power that took? You see, he didn't show him the misery. He showed him the glory of all the kingdoms of the world. And he says, all of this I will give you if you'll fall down and worship me. For it has been given to me, and I can give it to whom I please. Who gave it to him? Adam. But the important point is this. It showed us the enormous power to materialize things that Satan had. And that was just a little bit of what he can do. But the Bible predicted that as we drew near those final 7 years, that God's restraint of Satan would be drawn back gradually. And then when those 7 years start, all restraint is taken off. But we live in the days when a lot of that restraint has been removed. That's why this is not the same America most of us grew up in, is it? Well, it's the same thing all over the world. You see, the mystery of lawlessness is already coming in. It's talked about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. and is preparing the way for the man of lawlessness. And so when it says that the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to perform things and take over the whole world, and they're going to do it with the help of an alien God. And this, this is after the Antichrist of Rome has already put away the God of gods, the true God, and all other gods, and now he says, this is the God. How's he going to convince people? Well, I could write a good screenplay for that. One of those UFOs just has to land. And a person come out of it and say, I'm the one that started all of this, and I've come back to lead you and the human race to its greatest age of development and knowledge and awareness. And it says it's with the help of this one that he'll conquer everything. So,
Nobody left. Give me less than 5 minutes and I'll wrap it. That Hal Lindsey piece was in 2019. It was 2019. Have you heard that the government is going to declassify UFO files that they have had since the mid-40s? Did you hear about the UFOs that the military has video of that they released? Have you seen it? Here's just about a minute's worth of news.
Christine, yeah, so this filmmaker, he just released this video that was taken by the U.S. Navy. He says that this is the best UFO video that has ever been released to the public. But there are a lot more questions than our answers.
Who are they? Where are they from? And what is their intent?
All questions that immediately come to mind with a mention of UFOs.
We are now at a tipping point. It is time to let the public know what is known. No matter how big or small, what is known about the UFO presence on planet Earth.
LA-based investigative filmmaker Jeremy Corbell recently released this video taken by the Navy, showing what he describes as pyramid-shaped UFOs flying over the USS Russell off the San Diego coast in July of 2019.
UFOs are real. They're flying with impunity within our restricted airspace. They represent an advanced and sophisticated technology. And it's a technology that requires scientific scrutiny and study.
The Pentagon has since confirmed that the video is authentic. It's part of a recent data dump by Corbell and investigative reporter George Knapp. These pictures were taken by a pilot in March of 2019, apparently showing 3 different UFOs. 2 have since been dubbed the metallic blimp and the sphere. Corbell says these images from a Navy ship show a UFO seamlessly traveling through air and water.
The astonishing thing about it was its transmedium characteristic, meaning it was able to breach or penetrate the air-to-sea barrier without destruction. We don't have vehicles that can do that at high velocity, where it can go from flying to, into the water.
The goal is to expand the conversation about UFOs and demand transparency from the American government.
Okay, let's just say these guys are right. Let's just say that they saw what they saw, okay? And the description that they gave, it was able to go from air to sea instantly without destroying itself. What else is able to do that? Huh? Nothing of this world. Y'all remember, have y'all read Ezekiel chapter 1? I know some of you have because we taught Sunday school on Ezekiel a few years ago. And Ezekiel chapter 1 describes Ezekiel being in the throne room of God, and he is describing what he sees. He describes God's chariot. Does it sound familiar to anybody? The angels, how they're positioned in this chariot and how this chariot moves. And nobody says anything. They just know. And he starts talking, and you've really got to go line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, to understand what Ezekiel is trying to say. And if you'll do that, what you will find is he's telling you how the spirit world, how angelic beings operate, how they move, what they're able to do. He's describing something the best that he can, that he's just not seen before and doesn't understand how it's even possible. Kind of like John the Revelator. Is what these people are seeing, that they've been seeing since at least 1948, at least been documented since 1948, I'm just asking the question, could it be demonic?
It has to be. Okay, we don't have the two spirits. We have the evil spirit and the good spirit.
That's
So
right.
it's either of God, and God said it's demonic.
That's
We
right.
wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of the dark, and spiritual wickedness in heaven places. It ain't of God, it's of the devil. Ain't no in between spirit. Ain't no neutral ground in the realm of the spirit. You either for God or you against God. Ain't no remnants. Ain't no
Do you
neutral ground.
believe that people have been allowed to see angelic beings? I believe that, and there's some people who have a ministry where they can see angelic beings all the time, okay? I believe that. And if that's the case, and we know that the Bible tells us that angels have revealed themselves to people. Hello, the birth of Jesus, foretold to Mary and Joseph before it happened, they were visited by an angel. If the good angels can do that, why couldn't the bad ones?
No, they can't.
They can.
They can't. Most of the time they reveal themselves to children because the children don't know what's going on.
So, how many's been to Roswell, New Mexico? Anybody? Boy, it's a big deal, isn't it? It's like going into the twilight zone of the 50s. I'm not talking about aliens like they're talking about, with the long head and the big bubble eyes and all of that junk, you know. What I am saying is, I believe now in unidentified flying objects, but I believe that what they're seeing is a manifestation of demonic spirits, especially in the way that these things move, okay? Because I'm telling you, if you'll read Ezekiel chapter 1 and chapter 2, it describes how things move in the spirit world. And see if that doesn't kind of match what they're saying and what you're seeing. Okay? I'm not trying to be all ooh on everybody here. I'm just saying.
What is how this is? What is this? How does he clarify? What is he saying about this?
He's saying basically what I just said. He's saying that he believes that we've been gradually, society is being set up to where, is it a big deal to see a report on UFOs or aliens, or people believing in that? I mean, do you know people who believe that there's aliens who live out in another galaxy? I mean,
but this is what I said from the get-go. When they start seeing it, I said, they're not sick. All they're looking at is demons.
Yep.
UFOs ain't nothing but demons. That's the bottom line.
But can you see how a population that's already desensitized to something outrageous like that, it would be easy to use that, because now the Antichrist and the false prophet has unlimited demonic power to do anything they want to do during the tribulation.
Right.
Why couldn't they manipulate that, just like how Lindsay said, where how do they unite everybody into one religion? They bring a UFO out. and something walks out of the UFO and says, I'm the reason why you're here. I'm the one that created everything. And your Bible tells you that people will be under a great deception during that time.
Well, listen.
They're under it right now.
Right now, and that's why that's gonna happen, is because they don't know the Bible. That's what's wrong with us now. We don't know what our rights are. We can be deceived by anything.
Here's my disclaimer. This is where my presentation officially ends. Okay? What I've got left here relates to this. How many knew that the Vatican owns a deep space telescope, not one, but several, and it's on a mountain in Arizona? And NASA went in with them to put that observatory. Matter of fact, it's called the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. NASA went in and forced the government to allow them to put that thing on that mountain against the wishes of the Apache Indians who own that land. The Catholic Church. Now this all ties into this last prophecy thing, and it also ties into how the Catholic Church really operates. Okay? And they also have a telescope, and I could not tell you what each letter stands for. I'd have to look it up. But the acronym is Lucifer. You've heard this, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for those who want to stick around, I can show you a 20-minute clip of Tom Horn on the back end of his speech that he gives, and it basically tells you how this all ties into the end times. But I'm basically just leaving it up to you if you want to, and if nobody wants to, that's fine. I'm just saying.